Good morning or good afternoon or good evening for some of you. Even welcome to the Wednesday webinar of Fleetform. I see quite some people are joining us already today, which is great. Welcome everyone. And today I'm very happy that we will have a webinar facilitated by Pedders. And Pedders is one of our latest new members, and I'm very happy that Pedders joined the Fleetform community. Well, one, because it's always good to grow our community. The more, let's say, expertise we have, let's say, the more we can improve and learn from each other and collaborate. But also to see, what Pedders can bring to the table. And that's what they will do today, looking at a very specific topic. After a general introduction, it's great to have a new member. So Pedders will introduce themselves, but also look at a very specific topic that can help you, let's say, to see how you can, let's say, improve your road safety, but also improve, let's say, the performance of your vehicle. What's about the durability of your vehicle? How can you influence that? Looking at a specific topic of weight. And Pedders is an expert in that topic. And you will see soon. It's an exceptional webinar today because it's 45 minutes. Again, like I said, because that also allows our colleagues from Pedders to introduce themselves before we get into the more content topic of weight. It would be great if in the chat you can all let us know who you are, your name, the organization you work for, the country you work in. It gives us a bit of an interesting idea and to see where you all come from, what organization we have, how the spread over the different geographics of the world to do that. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A button at the top of your screen, and then we can publish the questions on the screen at the end. We will allow for some time for questions that you all have. Okay, well, it's great. I already see people typing in. Let's say all come. Again, your name, the organization you work for, the country you work in, and actually without further delay, I will hand over to Mark. Enjoy this webinar. I will be back with you at the end to facilitate, moderate the questions that you all have. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for that that fabulous introduction. And firstly, also a thanks for accepting Pedders Suspension and Brakes into the Fleet Forum. We're exceptionally excited to be involved, and thanks one and all for joining us on this webinar today to find out a little bit more about Pedders, about what we do, and about our specialist area in that tow and load and weight carrying. So joining me today from Pedders from Australia, I've got Caroline Pedder, who's our Chief of Brand and Culture, which will be giving a small presentation after me. And then we've also got Michael Green, who is our subject matter expert, product manager, and our guru, so to speak, on everything about tow and load and the effects of weight. So just a real quick introduction to Pedders. Pedders is a 75-year-old family business based in Australia. The business was started by my grandfather Roy as a white welding business. He was welding up old lever type shock absorbers, which got him into the suspension game, and he did that for the first sort of 15, 16 years of our existence. In the late 60s, my father Ron took the business over and really grew the business to sort of what we see today. So in Australia, we've got over 130 outlets just specialising in suspension and brakes. We now export to over 40 countries around the world. And Ron, my father, was instrumental in really building that base, building the product range and that type of thing. I was lucky enough to take the business over in 2005 and continued on, from his great work, continuing to grow the product range, continuing to grow our customer base until 2019, when my brother Scott took the business over as managing director, and he is still managing director as we sit here today. So we've got a birthday next year, 75 years. As I said, we've got 130 outlets across Australia. We export to over 40 countries. We've got a huge product range for all different sorts of vehicles, but what we're going to be concentrating on today is that tow and load and that effects of weight. Just to give you a real quick rundown of the pillars of our business, families is number one. We're still a family-owned business, but we touch so many different families, both in Australia and around the world. Being a franchise business domestically, we're assisting and helping 130 other families run their business. Quality is huge for us. Australia is a small place, 25 million people. So if we're not on our game and have great quality product fit for purpose, we don't last very long. Innovation's been a key part of what my grandfather did, what my father did, and what my brother and I, Scott, are all about. And obviously we're specialists in that suspension and brake field. We've had the opportunity over the course of many years to become a generalist, but we've really stuck to our knitting and really wanted to be the best in that suspension and brake area. So that's sort of 75 years in a couple of minutes. I know we've got a fair bit to get through, and I really wanted to hand over to Caroline Pedder, as I said, Chief of Brand and Culture, just to take you through our strategic vision and some ESG. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I look after brand and marketing, people and development, safety and ESG here at Pedders. I've been working in the business for close to 10 years, and prior to that, I've got a public policy and economics background. So I'm especially proud and excited to be part of this Fleet Forum. So thank you for having us today. I just wanted to show you our strategic placemat because I feel like this gives us a really great snapshot of who we are and what we stand for. So we are the Better Journeys company. So our purpose is to create better journeys for our franchisees, customers and employees. And Mark just briefly mentioned our pillars, and they are really important and really represent what we stand for. So again, that's family, quality, specialists and innovation. We work with our people values, and we hold everyone accountable to these values, and that's working safely, working in partnership, providing expert advice and being the best that you can be. And just if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, that's how we measure ourselves. You are what you measure. I think the key takeaway here is that of the 5 KPIs, financial performance is one, but safety and engagement are really important to us also. And that leads me to sort of the next part of my presentation, which is about our ESG journey. So our ESG journey began in earnest in 2020 when Mark and Scott, the directors of the business, really realised that as a 70-year-old business, we need to ensure that we're around for another 70 years. And whilst we've always been really good at the S part of ESG, the social aspect, being a family business, we spent the last 3 or 4 years really focusing on ensuring that our policies and our procedures are either in line with or better than the already very high Australian standards. And this preliminary work really gave us the confidence to then measure ourselves against international best practice. And we realised how strong our alignment was and that we were performing pretty well in this space. So this year, Pedders became a signatory to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. And we're really proud of this. We're just the second automotive company in Australia to be a signatory. So as part of this commitment, we have commenced a framework to positively impact 4 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll just briefly run you through the 4 goals and our action areas. So SDG 3, good health and wellbeing. Our action area here is on education and advocacy on vehicle safety, which is obviously what the majority of this seminar will be about. So we're investing in R&D, education, training and information sharing. and ultimately providing solutions on the effects of weight to make vehicles safer. We're involved in advocacy work domestically, notably via our partnership with the Australian Road Safety Foundation. This foundation is focused exclusively on reducing road trauma in Australia. And now, through our representation on this forum, we have this incredible platform to advocate and educate members on the effects of weight on vehicle safety, so that you as fleet managers can have confidence to send your team members out into the field in safe vehicles, which are often effectively their workplaces. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. We have two action areas here. Firstly, we're working towards independent certification for ISO 45001, which is Occupational Health and Safety Management System. And we're on track to achieve this certification by mid next year. This work's underpinned by a dedicated safety officer, a really comprehensive management system that operates across all our Pedders owned and Pedders branded work sites. And as I mentioned before, we measure and report on safety indicators across our work sites as well. Action area number 2 is continued work in building a robust and ethical supply chain. We've undertaken regular supplier assessments against our supplier code of conduct, and we're really proud to have voluntarily submitted modern slavery statements to the Australian government in the last couple of years. SDG 9, which is industry, innovation and infrastructure. Our action area here is working towards certification for ISO 14001, so that's the environmental management system, and we're also on track to achieve this certification by mid next year, which will see us have the 3 ISO certifications. So we've also already got quality. And as part of this work, we're also setting targets for energy efficiency improvements and also reducing waste in our operations. Finally, SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. Our action area here is we're undertaking a packaging review project for all our products. It's quite a comprehensive review with the aim of implementing improvements in terms of reducing our use of materials, eliminating single-use plastics, and also increasing the use of recyclable materials in our packaging. So as anyone involved in ESG understands, it's very much a journey, and we're focused on continuous improvement. We already have plans to expand our ESG initiatives in 2025 and beyond, targeting continued innovations that will contribute to vehicle safety, continued work in advocacy and education, and also environmental improvements in our operations, particularly our spring manufacturing plant. So we are really committed to leading the Australian automotive industry towards a more sustainable future. If you're interested in understanding a little bit more about our activities, we report on our ESG activities annually, and that's contained on our website and in our corporate brochure that we'll be sharing following this webinar. Thank you very much for having me. If you've got any questions, I'll obviously be hanging around at the end to answer them. But for now, I'll hand over to Michael Green, who is our expert, as you've heard, on tow and load and the effects of weight on a vehicle's safety and performance. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, thanks again, Paul, for having us along. We really appreciate the opportunity to discuss the impact or the effects of weight on a modern motor vehicle. So today I'll be focusing on vehicle performance and safety, specifically suspension, steering and brakes. And towards the end of the presentation, we will explore the Pedders weight matrix. So what you see in front of you is a pretty common sight in the fleet space, in the retail sector, in the trade sector. And it's not uncommon for us to come across a situation where we have a client or a customer attempting to carry a significant load with their vehicle. So the obvious signs in front of you is that the rear suspension has sagged. You can see on the bottom left there, the shiny mark at the top there, that's the suspension bottoming out. Okay, so the springs or the suspension is over compressing. So when we get over compression of the suspension, especially the springs and shocks, it bottoms out, right? So it's becoming compressed beyond its design limits, and it results in a harsh and uncomfortable ride. It also reduces shock absorption. So the suspension's ability to absorb the bumps and vibrations is compromised, leading to increased wear on other suspension components and a rough ride for the occupants. It also leads to premature suspension failure. So the increased stress on suspension components such as the springs and the struts leads to faster wear and more frequent part failures such as broken springs or leaking shock absorbers. Not to mention uneven load distribution. So in a scenario where you have an unbalanced load, it places uneven strain on the suspension system, causing one side of the vehicle to sag or wear more quickly than the other, leading to instability in turns. And the final probably key factor is increased body roll. So with more weight, vehicles experience greater body roll or lean on corners, making the vehicle feel unstable, especially when cornering or swerving suddenly in an emergency situation. So ultimately, if the vehicle is overloaded, we compromise the vehicle's structural integrity, comfort, and occupant safety. So the solution in the scenario you see on the top left would be a suspension upgrade, or in extreme cases, in this part of the world, a GVM, or in your part of the world, GVW or gross vehicle weight upgrade may be required. So what is a GVW or GVM upgrade? It's a modification you apply to the vehicle that increases the payload, also increases the GVW rating to ensure that the vehicle is compliant, safe, and operating efficiently. So payload is simply the difference between curb weight and the GVM or GVW. Rating is set by the manufacturer. And the end goal here is that you can increase the GVW rating, which ultimately increases the payload. So your ability to carry more cargo or more people. And we must remind ourselves that payload is both consumed by accessories or cargo and occupants. And don't forget tow ball mass on the tow bar if towing a trailer. So the example on the left is a GVM upgrade, and you'll note that it increases the payload by up to 600 kilos. So you'll see in the top there, the original GVW rating is 3,200, and in the bottom is 3,800 after an upgrade. But also take note, it increases the axle capacity front and rear. And obviously this will vary from vehicle to vehicle. So let's have a quick look at the impact of weight. We've got a brief understanding of what GVW is. And we know the payload of this example in front of us is 1,250 kilos, so quite substantial. And initially, you would consider that to be a very capable vehicle. But when planning a vehicle build, we can sometimes underestimate the vehicle's capability. So here we have the common fleet vehicle. So let's have a look how quickly we consume payload by adding some accessories. So a service body at approximately 488 kilos, a bit of frontal protection such as a bull bar or a nudge bar. Recovery winch is 35 kilos approximately. Add some towing equipment to the rear, so your tow bar. Communication equipment, so two-way radio, a cargo rack, and some safety lights and a water tank perhaps. You take all those necessary accessories out of the equation and your payload's now reduced to 562 kilos. So hypothetically, if that was a five-seater vehicle, 5 adults, roughly 80 kilos each, most of your payload is consumed in occupants, but we haven't even really discussed any tools of the trades. We don't know if this application is for an electrician or a builder or a government department where they have to carry 300 or 400 kilos worth of tools to get their job done. But yeah, what I really wanted to demonstrate there is how much the accessorizing of a vehicle can impact the payload. Now, on this slide here, what I wanted to demonstrate or ensure that we aren't mistaken that thinking payload and GVM only relate to light commercial vehicles. All vehicles manufactured have a GVM rating, and therefore they have a payload figure attached to it. So in this example, we have two popular vehicles, a large family sedan on the right-hand side and a smaller hatchback on the left. Now, reasonably, a person would think that the bigger car has a larger payload. But the fact with this is the one on the right, the larger vehicle, has 470 kilos of payload. So once again, just do some quick maths. With 5 adults in the car at 80 kilos each, there's 400 kilos of payload consumed. And now that vehicle's operating on the extreme end, it's on the heavier end, closer to that 470 kilos of payload consumed. So now we're compromising the steering, the suspension, and the brakes. And the one on the left, you might be surprised, 510 kilos of payload. So I guess the takeaway here is that don't just pay attention to the size of the truck or the size of the vehicle. You really need to look at the specifications and understand the engineering behind it and just see what the manufacturer has designed into that vehicle or engineered into that vehicle. So I just want to share this with you before we move on to steering. We've had this scenario recently that turned up to one of our workshops. The customer complained about poor steering, poor braking, and just generally a very uncomfortable ride. So what we had, or what we identified, was the gross combined weight, so that's the car and trailer connected together, had a maximum rating of 5,885 kilos. So we weighed it, and we identified that it was 7,208 kilos, quite heavy. So it's well over its GCW rating. It was actually 1,300 kilos heavier than what it should have been. So that explains why it was steering poorly, why the brakes weren't working, and the suspension was bottomed out full time in the rear suspension, so hence the uncomfortable ride. So ultimately, this vehicle would be unroadworthy. More importantly, it's unsafe. And safety is compromised for everyone in that vehicle and other road users because he's potentially causing damage to that vehicle. So how does weight impact steering? In these 3 images here, the one on the left, I've sort of depicted like a cargo carrying vehicle, like a van, with standard suspension and no load. Take a note of the suspension, take a note of the tyre contact patch on the front and rear axles. It's fairly even, and the centre of gravity is more towards the front of the car. So reasonably stable, well-handling vehicle. Now you look at the middle image, you apply cargo to the rear, and you actually move the centre of gravity to the rear, but at the same time, you lose traction or reduce tyre footprint on the front axle. So that will cause a few problems. And then the only way to really fix it is to upgrade the suspension on the far right. You'll see that it restores the tyre print on the front axle and improves the handling. So ignoring the problem reduces responsiveness, creates unbalanced steering, accelerates tyre wear, and ultimately we're in a period now where a lot of modern vehicles are fitted with electronic steering systems. So advanced steering systems that assist the driver may be interfered in terms of calibration, which ultimately results in less precise steering control. So brakes. We often find a lot of people overlook the brakes and they just want to beef up the suspension to cope with the extra loads. But here in Australia, we actually have the capability to do ADR testing in terms of brake tests. And we actually perform this test in a controlled environment. And what we found was at 60 k's an hour on an unladen dual cab ute, the average stopping distance was 13.4 meters. So completely unloaded, controlled scenario. It was on a private racetrack. And then we did some tests at 80 kilometers an hour. We found the stopping distance average was 23.8 meters. And again, at 100 k's an hour, 37 meters was the average stopping distance. We loaded each vehicle up, and at 60 k's an hour, so at maximum GVW, that dual cab now takes 29 meters to come to a halt. So that's more than double compared to when the vehicle was empty. So just have a think about that for a moment. If you're a fleet manager and you have your employees arriving to work in an unladen vehicle, I think the natural tendency to understand the braking efficiency of an unloaded car, and then they immediately hop into a loaded vehicle, something's got to trigger in the brain to understand that the braking distance is going to be dramatically longer. So then we also did the testing at 80 k's an hour, fully loaded to GVW. And once again, we could prove, or we understood, that the braking distance was more than double again. So 23.8 meters unloaded versus 51.8 at full maximum GVW. 100 k's an hour, it gets more frightening. So fully loaded, the stopping distance was 80.5 meters. Once again, more than double. So the takeout here is that heavier vehicles generate more momentum, significantly increasing the distance needed to stop. So even with modern ABS systems, the additional weight makes emergency stopping very difficult to achieve. So other brake considerations include braking system overload. So overloading your vehicle can stress your brake pads, your brake rotors, and your brake calipers, not to mention drum brakes on the rear of a commercial vehicle, ultimately wearing them out faster and increasing the risk of brake fade, where the brakes lose their effectiveness due to excessive heat buildup. So obviously, once you have excessive heat buildup, you have heat dissipation issues. So once again, with excessive weight, brakes have to work harder to slow down the vehicle, generating more heat. When brakes overheat, they become less effective. This condition is known as brake fade, which is particularly dangerous during extended downhill driving. So not to mention increased wear and tear. Components such as your brake pads, discs, and drums wear out much more quickly when a vehicle is overloaded, necessitating frequent replacements and increasing overall fleet maintenance costs. And then another one that's quite out of sight, out of mind, is that the brake fluid can overheat. So excessive brake use, especially under heavy loads, can cause brake fluid to overheat, ultimately turning it into a gas, and leads to a decrease in hydraulic pressure, reducing the braking power. And the final one is the failure of parking brakes. So overloaded vehicles, whilst they're not in motion, can still pose a risk because the park brake can fail even when the car is unattended. So the additional weight places extra stress on the park brake system, making it less reliable, especially on inclines. So by now, we're probably thinking, okay, suspension, yep, that was an obvious one. We understand that. Steering, yep, that makes sense. Brakes, yeah, we probably didn't think too much about brakes. But then we got to consider chain of responsibility. So just a thought for everyone attending, we all play a part in the responsibility of a safe workplace, but what measures do you have in place for load management and your vehicle operators? How do they understand how much load or how much payload they have available? So the end goal collectively is for everyone to work together to create a safe and comfortable work environment. Now, what I would like to share with you or introduce you to is the Pedders weight matrix. So this is a interactive software program developed wholly and solely by Pedders. We call it the Pedders weight matrix. The goal here is that it helps you understand any scenarios or any planned scenarios and assist in managing loads and choosing the correct vehicle if you intend on building or quoting for a customer, or even just assessing your own fleet. So I'll just share some screenshots with you now. So this is your home screen. So like I said before, this is a fully interactive software program developed by Pedders. This is just a screenshot, and I'll run through it quickly. So at the top here, you can select what vehicle you have in your fleet. We weigh each vehicle as they're released to market, and we can tell you that the vehicle chosen for this example is a Toyota Hilux, and the front original axle weight's 1,210 kilos, and 745 on the rear, and a total of 1,955. Okay, so that's the tear weight or the curb weight. This software will demonstrate how much payload is available with the OEM suspension, and then how much payload is available with the Pedders suspension upgrade or a GVW upgrade. It also demonstrates weight balance, so that's the center of gravity shift that I mentioned a few slides ago, and also gives you an indication of the estimated braking distance without reaction time consideration, because obviously that's going to vary from driver to driver. Now, on the next slide, what we've done is we've theoretically created a vehicle build. We've added some frontal protection, a dual battery system, a tow bar, a tray. We've added a canopy and some cargo. Okay, so this is all interactive on our website through a login. So you can manipulate and adjust the ratings or the loads. And what you'll find now is what we call our scenario weight is now we've got 1,284 kilos applied on the front axle and a whopping 1,661 on the rear. So now that vehicle's weighing in at 2,945. And more importantly, you can check out, sorry, a few clicks there. You've got the original weight there. And then we've got the payload available with the OEM suspension. Just pay particular attention to the rear axle capacity, sort of in the middle of the screen there. It's down to 39 kilos. So you're almost breaching capacity on the rear axle. But if you were to consider a suspension upgrade or a GVW upgrade, you would actually attain 339 kilos of payload capability on the rear axle. Interestingly, you can see the weight balance shift is quite considerable compared to the previous slide. And obviously, our braking distance has obviously increased with the significant loads. So I just wanted to mention this is free. We've developed this for free. Any fleet manager in the world can have access to it. And I have no doubt Paul will share some details after the presentation. The other thing I wanted to mention was we're probably running out of a little bit of time, but we actually have a load rider, a product called the Pedders Load Rider. It's an onboard scale system. I've provided a link there, so you can research that yourself after the session. We also host a few videos on Pedders, a Pedders YouTube channel. There's some really good educational videos there about the impact or the effects of weight. And then at the very bottom there, we work with other industry experts, and we've created a full training suite, which there's a username and password there for you to access to explore further. But in closing, to summarize the presentation, the key takeouts here is that managing vehicle weight and avoiding overloading is essential for ensuring safety, minimizing maintenance costs, and maximizing vehicle lifespan. That's quite important. So ensuring that vehicles are loaded within legal weight limits benefits everyone on the road, including the vehicle operator. All right, I hope you found this information relevant, and I will now hand you back to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for the presentation, of course. Mark and Caroline for your introduction as well. It's really interesting looking at the impact of weight and like you said, the impact on road safety, the impact on safety in general, the impact on costs, and probably also the impact on emissions, which did not even, let's say, tap into, but that's a huge impact, which we probably not always realize what the impact of that is, you know, and that's also great that there's a way to mitigate all the risks. So if I look at some of the questions, there's quite some questions, and I think you already answered this, but on, okay, is the tool, the weight matrix, because there's a lot of interest for it, is the weight matrix accessible for everyone? Can you just use it? So how does that work?
So the weight matrix tool, there is a registration process. So I think we'll provide some email contact at the end, and one of our sales team members will process any registrations or any interests. We also have a what I call a light version on the pedders.com.au website, where a lot of retail customers use it to give them an indication of how heavy their car might be. But yeah, definitely encourage getting registered to use the software because it's very good. It's got plenty of adjustability, so you can actually go through. And if you had a choice of 3 different vendors for a service body, for example, they all will have different weights. So you can play around with that to make sure that your vehicle is compliant and within its axle capacity limits, as well as its GVW.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so we will definitely share the link to the weight matrix, but also the links that you had on your last page. I don't know if you're comfortable, we can share the whole presentation with people even, but that's up to you if you are open to do so. And then, well, then people all have the links automatically. When you shared some screenshots of the weight matrix, and you had an example of a Hilux, then people asked, is this weight, let's say, only for all Hilux models or for specific Hilux models, or is it for all off-road vehicles? So how specifically is it?
Good question. So we break that up into body shape and factory trim. So is it a cab chassis or is it a style side? So when you go through the process and you want to assess the vehicle, we actually have broken it down even to engine size. So there's a couple of manufacturers there that will have 3 or 4 different engine sizes available. So whether it's a 2 litre or 2.5 or V6 option, for example, because they can have a significant impact on the results depending on the base weight. Because as you can imagine, a 3 litre V6 is significantly heavier than a 2 litre 4-cylinder. And what you can't see is the center of gravity, right? No one can see that. But when you apply the physical loads to the front or rear of the car, that's when it tells you the true story of if that vehicle will be potentially breaching its capacities.
Okay, clear. Thanks, Michael. Then there is a question. Do you think altering the vehicle's specification will ensure the car is safe on the road? And how will it affect the vehicle's expected 5-year lifespan or 150,000 kilometers?
Yeah, great question again. I think if, well, we take a few steps back, if we're working with the OEM specification, so we're not exceeding the axle capacity or we're not exceeding the GVW rating, I think we're all reasonably think that the lifespan of that vehicle is fairly safe, okay? As long as we keep up the maintenance and servicing, that's okay. For us to increase the GVW, there's quite a strict testing regime we must go through. We need to demonstrate that the front axle and the rear axle, ESC, ABS, swerve testing, we've got to make sure that all complies as if it's a brand new car being released to the Australian market. So most would be familiar with Australian design rules. It's quite comprehensive and challenging and exhausting testing required to make sure that car performs at the GVW that you claim it can perform at. So in terms of safety, yes, we tick the box. It has to be safe. Otherwise, the federal government won't approve a GVW upgrade. But the second part to that is that if we've taken a car and the OEM's designed or engineered that vehicle to be have a GVW of 3,200 kilos, for example, and then an aftermarket company has gone and done all the testing and proven that it can go to, let's say, 3,800 kilos, that's quite significant. That's 20% more than what the OEM intended. We must reasonably understand that there may be accelerated wear on wheel bearings. There may be the need for more frequent servicing. You may experience increased tyre wear, but that's the price you pay to make that vehicle capable. And on paper and under OH&S, you're making it legal and as safe as you possibly can.
Okay, great. Thanks. Again, Michael. More questions on who to contact, how to access the tool. And like I said, is we will share links. And again, like Michael said, there's a light version, and then there's let's say the more comprehensive version as well, which need a registration process. But still, then you are able after registration to use the tool. So it's great that Pedders that you can offer that to our community, because it's an extremely valuable tool, as you see of all the components. Let me see if there's any more questions. Did your company have the traffic officials in mind when designing this tool?
Oh, traffic officials. It's interesting you raise that. In the recreation industry, or recreation sector, sorry, in Australia, government officials or police, they are monitoring overloaded vehicles. So in Australia, the culture is that if the car looks overloaded, they will pull over or stop the operator of that vehicle and weigh the car. So when you start throwing into the mix a 3.5-ton caravan, you can easily imagine that these cars would be grossly overloaded. And we have seen in the media where operators have been halted on the side of the road and they cannot continue their journey until they make that car legal. So yeah, the officials do have scales and they are weighing vehicles. It's a reality here in Australia.
Okay, clear.
Yeah.
Any more questions? We have time for one more question if there is. And if there's not, again, like we said, we will share the details, links, contact details. And if there's any more questions afterwards, that you could always, let's say, let us know or contact Pedders directly. But there's always a way. So this is your first, let's say, encounter with Pedders, but definitely not your last one. So it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like we ran out of questions. So Michael is the last one, and Caroline and Mark, I really would like to thank you for this webinar. Very interesting topic and very important topic as well, because weight on vehicles has a huge impact, and in development organizations have to deal with that. Apart from weight, also in combination with, let's say, infrastructure challenges, road challenges. So it's an extremely important topic. So thank you for your clear presentation and pointing out risks, but also potential solutions for it. Thank you all for your active participation, for your questions. Really triggered some good discussion. So thank you for that. And we will hope to see you soon in one of our next webinars. Have a great rest of the day or evening, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.